Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the Dominican American National Roundtable comes to the position with an impressive background in organization, sociological research, and public relations. The combination of his skills makes him a visionary who is focused and a hands-on leader who is also setting the agenda for the DANR and Dominicans in the United States for the next 10 years. Please help me welcome President Nestor Montilla.
Thank you. Thank you, Luis Guzman. Thank you very much. Distinguished dignitaries, elected officials, conference speakers and panelists, students, special guests, conference participants, Dominicans. We are convened today at the 12th Dominican American National Roundtable Conference to consider and discuss the state of Dominicans in the U.S. and set the direction of the Dominican community for the next 10 years. It is opportune and appropriate that we review why, how, and when we got here, where we are, and where we are going. We can say that since their arrival, Dominicans have carved out a place for themselves within the American cultural and social landscape. As one of the largest ethnic groups in the United States, Dominicans have made strides as a community with a distinct cultural identity and a substantial and meaningful contribution to this society. The presence of Dominicans in the U.S. as a formidable ethnic group has its origins in the migration patterns of the late 1980s, relatively late in comparison to that of Puerto Ricans and Cubans. Unlike Cubans who fled to the U.S. after the rise of the communist presence in Cuba, or like Puerto Ricans who were born American citizens after the enactment of the Jones Act of 1917, Dominicans were not allowed to travel under the regime of dictator Rafael Leonidas Trujillo. Only the political and economic elite were allowed this freedom and possessed the means to make it to the United States. After Trujillo was assassinated and the power structure of the island changed, travel amongst Dominicans became a possibility and in some cases a necessity. Eventually, under Joaquin Balaguer, all who chose to leave the Dominican Republic in search of better lives were given the opportunity to go. Due to an almost continuous decline of the country's economic and political stability in the mid to late 1980s, and due in part to a long recession after the so-called Dominican economic miracle, Dominicans were part of one of the largest migratory booms of the late 20th century. This migratory boom is made evident not just by the presence of Dominicans as an ethnic group, but from the Hispanic, Latino communities basically in general. According to the U.S. Census 2000, there are over 40 million Hispanics or Latinos in the United States, of which over 1 million are of Dominican descent. The number of Dominican migrants to the U.S. in the early 1970s and mid-1980s was rather low, totaling close to 350,000. The migration boom of the following 10 years, however, consolidated their presence in the United States of America. Between 1990 and 2000, the population of Dominicans increased from 348,000 to 692,000. From the years 2000 to 2004, the population of Dominicans once again soared as there was an increase from 692,000 to more than 1 million Dominicans living in the United States. Today, as the upcoming U.S. Census 2010 will surely reflect, there are over 2 million Dominicans in the U.S., and that's not an exaggeration. Adding the children of Dominicans born in the U.S. would make this figure much higher. Of all registered ethnic groups from Latin America, Dominicans make up the third largest group after Mexicans and Puerto Ricans. More than half of Dominicans in the United States reside in the state of New York. The state of New Jersey has the second largest Dominican population with more than 153,000 Dominicans. Unofficial estimates put that figure on 250,000, followed by the state of Florida with 132,000. Massachusetts, 60,000. Pennsylvania, 66,000. Puerto Rico, 57,000. Unofficial estimates indicate there are over 150,000 Dominicans in Puerto Rico. Rhode Island, 40,000. Connecticut, 28,000. Maryland, 16,000. And Alaska, 2,000, but we know that there are over 4,000 Dominicans living in Alaska. They are Dominicans living in each of the 435 congressional districts in the United States of America. Dominicans are different from other ethnic communities by the way they have done since their arrival to the U.S. and how they have defined themselves in three aspects: family connection, integration pattern, and race. In terms of family connection, most Dominicans arriving in the U.S. have some family connection here and easily enter into small businesses like bodegas, international phone calling centers, restaurants, remittance wiring, taxi companies, barbershops, beauty parlors, and travel agencies as means to make a living. In the state of New York alone, Dominicans own close to 25,000 small businesses, which revitalizes the city's economy. Unlike other groups that have come to the U.S., Dominicans keep a strong bond with their homeland, both with their remittances, which amount to an estimated $2 billion a year, and their active participation in the Dominican Republic and Dominican politics. In terms of integration pattern, another characteristic of Dominicans is that they, unlike other ethnic groups, refer to themselves as Dominicans and not Dominican Americans. Cubans, whether born in the U.S. or not, call themselves Cuban Americans. Puerto Ricans are referred to as Puerto Ricans. Some of them prefer to be called Americans, and in some cases, Nuyorican. And Mexicans born in the United States are referred to as Chicano. Many of them identify that way, which reflects a joint level of pride for both heritages. Dominicans have yet to embrace this as part of their identity. They are ultimately very nationalistic and inherently tied to their roots and hold an overwhelming level of pride toward their culture and customs, which they are not willing to give up easily. Spanish, still the language of choice for most Dominicans in the U.S. Stigmatization has added another challenge to the integration of Dominicans to the U.S. cultural and social landscape. The U.S. society, influenced by the media, which almost always portray Dominicans in a negative light, associates Dominicans with the vices of poverty, crime, violence, and lawlessness. Aside from the fact that Dominicans have made strides in sports, which has come at a price of stereotyping young Dominicans as only baseball players, they are often labeled as menaces. In terms of race, ultimately, the racial aspect has differentiated Dominicans in another way. Dominicans are not white, and they are not black. Dominicans often shun the strict rules of racial classification in accordance with the American model and rely on the Dominican model as the default concept with which to classify themselves. In the United States, there are specific categories for classification.